So Rishi, I'm sure it's not as if you don't get this asked many a times, but I read that OakNorth is a cloud-based bank. So, how did it strike to you to put up a cloud-based bank, and how does it really work? I mean, this is the first that I've heard of it.
We launched the business in 2015. And when we were setting up the company, we were very clear that the inflexibility of technology systems leads to lack of dynamic updates and evolution in businesses, and banking has suffered that more than most. Okay, because banking systems are complex, they're mission critical. There's a lot of regulatory oversight, etc. And therefore, from day one, our view was, how can we make sure that we're using effectively the most current technology, which is going to allow us to actually evolve the business as we go forward. And we were clear that using cloud technology is significantly superior than trying to let's say co-host or even internally host, right? The flexibility, the reliability, the ability to put cybersecurity defenses around, and just the nimbleness of your infrastructure. So at the time that we wanted to do this, the UK regulator hadn't actually determined what their policy was with respect to cloud computing, because they hadn't gone through this before. So we worked very closely with AWS to help input into the first white paper, which then got put together by the UK regulator on cloud computing, which we then published. So we ended up having to go get licensed based on a co-host model, and we worked with AWS, worked with the regulator to actually get the cloud computing position out there. And once the regulator had that, then we switched immediately to cloud. And what that's enabled us to do is, through our now 9 years of in existence, we built up our stack originally 2015, 2017, 2018, we refreshed part of our stack, and now we're refreshing most of our stack again, right? And if you think about that, we're going through 3, 4, 5 year cycles within this. You can't do that if you're in more traditional legacy type environments. So I think that decision was at that time, it felt pretty novel. Today, it's the only decision you'd clearly make if you're setting up a new business today, and it set us up very well for the journey that we've been through so far.
So does OakNorth have a physical presence at all, and therefore, what kind of functions are similar to like a regular bank? And what are the functions that you have which are completely, new because of the cloud structure?
I mean, look, ultimately, what do banks do? We bring in deposits and we lend money, right? Mm-hmm. So do we do functions similar to a traditional bank? Yes, we bring in deposits and we lend money, right? Mm-hmm. So at the very core of what we do, it is exactly what traditional banks do, okay?
Right.
Now, where's our focus been? Our focus has been, when we're lending money, it's really been to commercial customers, so to companies, okay? And
when you say companies, these would be startups? Or do you have some kind of favorite sectors that you...
Our segment is really what we call the missing middle. So these are really scale-up businesses, right? These are not startups, but they're businesses which have started, and they may be, $1 million in revenue plus, and now they're trying to figure out how they go from 1, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 million to 40, 50, 60, 100 million, right? That's our segment. It's helping companies scale rather than start, okay? And we've been very, very focused on that segment since day one, because that's where our view is that there's always been a very large gap, okay?
Right.
So our focus on lending has been to those customers, and we believe we understand that segment incredibly well. And we've got many, many stories where we've helped companies now scale very significantly, grow multiple fold from where they were before they became an OakNorth client, right? On deposits, we bring in deposits both from consumers as well as from businesses, right? And that activity is pretty much all virtual. So that's all based on mobile or web banking, right? Now, you can say, okay, today every bank has that because it's now just a requirement, right? 100%, we started on that basis and we've always been on that basis, right? So the experience in terms of actually being able to open an account with us, either as a consumer or a business, is multiple times faster than what it is with an incumbent bank. The ability to actually go about your transactions in terms of the efficiency, that experience, again, just very different, right? Because when you built up on a native basis, mobile native and web native versus brick and mortar native, you just end up in a different place, right? So to answer your question, the experience in terms of being a depositor with us is one where you interact purely mobile and web, right? And yes, you do have access to people as well, but that is really by exception rather than not. The lending process is actually, in a way, more similar to a traditional process on the front end in terms of what the customer experience would feel, because ultimately we have what we call debt finance directors who actually interact with customers, right? But on the back end, there's a lot of automation driven through the process.
Right. And large part of your customers, they come from UK and the US markets, or do you have sort of a volume coming from other markets too?
So our whole focus in terms of our client markets are the UK and US, right? So that is exactly that is where our client base is.
But you have big teams sitting out of India. So what exactly is their functional role?
So look, we set up this business. My co-founder and myself had built a previous business, Copal, which was a financial analytics business, which we sold through to Moody's. That business was built day one out of India, and then ultimately had teams in India, Sri Lanka, in China, in Costa Rica, etc. And we really learned how, through that business, how to build incredibly strong teams for highly analytical use cases out of India. And when we were building OakNorth, it was just logical for us to sort of say, okay, we know that there's such a strong talent pool here. How can we take this to the next level? So today, actually, if you look at the business, you've got maybe just under a half of the full headcount actually based in India, right? And it's always been a highly integrated team. So the view isn't that this is back office or middle office. This is fully front office. You have teams in India who are interacting with our customers in the UK, the US, and a primary contact points there. And that's just worked incredibly well for us. So one of our value points, one of our values is one team, and we really live that one team aspect. And it doesn't matter if someone's based in New York, in London, in Manchester, in Gurgaon, or in Bangalore. It's fundamentally what is the purpose of that team? What's the purpose of that squad? Where are they focused? And ultimately, how do we make sure we've got the best talent within that to actually deliver for our needs? So absolutely, India, absolutely core, critical to our talent strategy. And I'd also add that we've had some pure product innovation out of India as well, where, for example, the 2017 sort of part refresh of our stack, which I mentioned earlier, we built our own core lending platform because our view was that you have a lot of core banking platforms which are very good for consumer, for small business, and then maybe for large business. But again, we sit in between, right? And the requirements that we needed were very specific, and we didn't find a good, again, cloud-based product for that. We didn't want to go to traditional legacy software. So we fundamentally built our own core lending product, which is fully built out of Bangalore. And again, is what we continue to scale today.
So, India has its own digital bank in the form of UPI. And so do you see sort of doing similar to what you're doing with OakNorth in UK and in the US, which is like your core digital banking functions? Would you want to bring them to India at some point of time as well? I mean, like as in the full operations and not just your software development teams?
Yeah. So, well, just to be clear, India's software development, it's credit analytics, it's portfolio monitoring, it's much more than just software development. I have to say that as someone who is absolutely Indian, right, but has lived a large part of my life outside India, operating in India is a different ball game, right? Domestically, building a domestic business in India just requires muscle, which is different, right? So maybe one day, but I think in the short term, our focus markets, UK and US. And look, that's the same when people ask if we're going to go to continental Europe or the like, right? For us, the UK and the US, the markets that we're most accustomed to, and the size of those markets is also very large. Now, you could say the benefit on India is India's growth rate is much higher, right? But the complexities of understanding India and adapting the model to work in India is just something which we feel like maybe in the future.
And in some ways, does OakNorth also work like a VC fund?
So no and yes, because from a pure business model perspective, no. From a value to the customer perspective, to the business, yes. And why do I say that? Because fundamentally, a venture fund clearly backs a business to be able to enable their growth, okay? OakNorth will come in only when the business is positive free cash, when it's making profit, right? But what OakNorth will do is then help those businesses grow with senior bank lending, opposed to having to raise more equity, right? If they've got enough cash flow generation. So you do get to a point where OakNorth becomes an alternative to bringing in much more expensive growth equity, so higher end of venture, not startup venture, but higher end of venture growth equity type funding into a business, or it's a perfect complement too, right? So if you were looking to raise 100 units of capital, right, you could end up with raising 30, 40 of equity and then 60, 70 of debt.
So you don't have any equity sort of play in lending?
We do not have an equity play in lending, no.
So, I'll come back to India again. So, obviously, because you have such big teams over there. So from an Indian perspective, what do you think of India's fintech talent? And, overall, in terms of their understanding of finance. And we have got some great fintechs which have come out of India, which are now ready to go global. So what is your opinion about that?
India has developed incredible businesses which are domestic fintech businesses. They've also been massively benefited by UPI, etc., right? So there's been a massive tailwind helped by government policy around this. Because of that, you have a talent pool which inherently understands, let's say, multiple segments of fintech very, very well, right? So I think that fintech talent in India generally strong, right? Experience good. The nuances in every market are nuances, right? And but I think that broadly, I would say very strong. The perception of India on a global basis has obviously massively evolved and continues to evolve, right? India is viewed as one of the key growth markets, right? Penetration in the technology world is just so strong. The point that we discussed earlier in terms of product businesses having been built in India and now moving into other markets as businesses is incredibly exciting. Volume of investment, number of companies, etc. India's right up there in terms of the technology world. So I think that's all just very exciting. And as I said, I think that therefore sets up a great view for how that continues to evolve over the next years.
Do you expect a lot of Indian fintechs also to come to UK markets in times to come? I mean, I know the government has been harping about taking UPI all over the world, but do you feel that Indian fintechs are ready to go abroad?
I definitely think that there are some Indian fintechs which are ready to sort of operate internationally. It all comes down to where's the gap in the market that you see, what's your patience, what's your execution capability, etc., right? But is there a reason why Indian fintechs shouldn't be competing on a global basis? No, there isn't a reason, right?
Right.
I think Indian fintechs are much better placed clearly than Chinese fintechs, right? Which have had their challenges just with the geopolitical issues. So I think absolutely.
So what is the crypto play there at the OakNorth? I mean, obviously today banks are sort of also looking and managing crypto as an asset. So, at OakNorth, how are you looking at crypto?
For better or worse, we're sort of traditional when it comes to crypto, i.e. we're not playing in crypto at all, right? As you've got more evolution to central bank digital currencies, right? We are very interested in that, right? But the UK at least and the US are still further away from that. Who knows what happens in the US? But I think in terms of dealing with existing cryptocurrencies which are out in the market, we think they absolutely have a place in the market, but that doesn't necessarily overlap with OakNorth's core client base. So we're not seeing a drive from our customer base around crypto. As I said, we feel the need to lean in very heavily as you get more central bank backed digital currencies.
For banks, a lot of banks, private investment banking is a very big function today, which a lot of banks are working on. So do you also have that function in place at OakNorth, and how do you go about it? So what kind of portfolios, if at all, do you have and you suggest to your clients, customers?
So what we don't do is we don't do investments, trading, etc. We've kept OakNorth incredibly simple and focused on the areas that we think we can add material value around. So when it comes to people depositing with us, our deposit products are all savings products, right? And therefore it's the equivalent FDs. And we just have different structures, different tenures, flexibility, etc. around that. But we're not in the game of creating public market portfolios and helping people trade, etc.
How do you sort of compete with traditional banks out there? Are your rate of returns higher than, let's say now, if it's a FD model that you have or a similar one in place? So are your rate of returns better to customers who are putting deposits versus, let's say, a traditional bank? And therefore, what are you lending rates to?
Yeah, so our FD rates are better, right, on average, right, than the traditional banks. So yes, our experience is much better, right? And I would say that maybe someone initially comes to us because of our rates, but I think they stay with us because of our experience. And generally they rave about us, i.e. they shout out and they help us acquire new customers by word of mouth because of the experience, right? And that's really where we focused. In terms of our lending customers, the companies, because we're much more focused and thoughtful about how we solve for that particular segment, we deliver a totally different experience there. And because we're enabling their growth in a different way to what an incumbent bank would, that is the core reason why people come to us.
So if you were to go into a new market, what would it probably be? Like a GCC or maybe some other markets where you have some good customers?
We spent time in the UAE. We think it's an incredibly attractive market, and one which has just a lot of tailwind behind it. Again, it's the same point around focus.
Okay, great. Lovely speaking to you, Rishi.
A pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
And, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll meet in India whenever you're around next.
That would be a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.